Hey, this is Leslie with Comfortable Shoes Studio. Welcome to Art Journaling number 9, a second on making your own collage materials. I'm showing a few more examples of the deli paper with ink tints, pencils, and some paint markers. I use almost primarily the oil-based Sharpie paint markers in my artwork. For a variety of reasons. They're readily available. They're a little cheaper than the Poscas. They also have a really nice glossy texture, and I use them for making art on plastic stuff, which you will have seen in my videos before, the Make It Mine series, where I decorated chapstick tubes, which people seem to universally hate. But oh well, I enjoy it. So in this video, I wanted to kind of extend out the idea of making your own collage materials. This time I'm using watercolor pencils, which you may or may not have. Maybe you have colored pencils or in watercolors. I'm just using these because I had them on hand and I do really enjoy them. And this is I think it is a 12 color set. Yeah, it's the Derwent 12 color set for watercolor pencils. I've got a larger set that was given to me as a gift, but I find these on sale and I will pick them up because I do use them quite heavily for sketching, but also in my art journal. They're just a great, pretty universal tool to add a nice amount of color to any page. So I do sharpen mine with a craft knife. You can use an X-Acto knife. I basically I'm just peeling off the wood to expose about 1.5 inches of the watercolor lead. Just throwing the trash into a cup. I use that for fire starting. And then I'm going to work in related colors on one big sheet. I'm adding background color here. So I'm using orange, yellow, and red on this page. And just scribbling one color in a quadrant of the page. Then I'll add another color and another color. And I forgot to sharpen one, so I'm going to whip out that knife again and sharpen some more. Doesn't take very long to sharpen them up. I'm not making a point. I am just exposing the core of the pencil, just peeling off that wood. So I'm adding yellow on here, and it looks a bit green on my screen. I did have to do some color correction. The blue cutting mat really throws the color off in this camera, and most of my cameras do not respond well to that blue cutting mat. It throws the color correction and the sensor all over the place. So I've had to do some color correction, and it didn't do so great. I did warm it up quite a bit, but it had a rough time here. I added a little bit of green down on the bottom there. I regretted it almost immediately. But again, adding a little bit of green to reds and oranges, it can make mud, but it can also just dull it down a little bit so that the color looks a little more natural. So if you haven't watched my video on what to do with paint water, I try not to just dump my paint water down the drain. I have these trays and I let the water evaporate off, and then the tray I take to the toxic trash day, which we have in my city once a year. And they let you bring in paint containers and whatnot for recycling, and they take care of it appropriately. But I do that with my acrylic paints. Like I said, I try not to let that go down the drain too much for a variety of reasons. It can cause problems with your drain, Watercolors, not so much, but again, professional watercolors do use some toxic metals in them, so I try to keep it out of the water table. So then I'm doing that wet into wet technique. This time I'm just kind of making like little organic circles. I'm not trying to necessarily fill the page, and then I'm going to make a red skull on a yellow background because I draw skulls all the time. What's really nice about the wet into wet with the watercolor pencils is that the color is nice and vibrant. It lays down a lot of pigment. And it's really smooth. This paper does okay with the wet into wet. This is the Talon's Art Creations paper. I removed a few pages because my journal was getting super fat and having trouble closing. I like just making some kind of random marks into the wet orangey red area. So with larger paper like this is like an 8.5 by almost 12-inch sheet of paper, I do prefer to kind of work in fourths because I'm probably not going to use a full sheet of these marks. Although you never know. Especially my art journal, if I'm making collage materials specifically for my art journal, I'm going to use smaller pieces, so quarters of the page work really well. Whereas if I'm working on a board or I'm working on, an artwork that will be, finished and sold or whatnot, then I'll make it larger. I'll work an entire 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Hitting it with the heat gun, getting a little dry. So I can go back into that with a paint marker or more watercolors. I can add some more layer. I could also add some acrylic paint over the top of that. Lots of options here for how these papers can be used. Camera's having a little trouble keeping up with the movement of my hand, so it's a little blurry. Now it's focusing again. I don't know, I thought I had it locked. So I'm doing a big 2-color blue background. I got that bright blue, and then I've got the more darker Payne's gray, kind of blue gray color. It's warmer than that bright blue. Again, camera's having a little struggling with keeping focus on my hand. That big movement. Plenty of light in here, but camera is definitely struggling. I do have some diffusers on my lights, which seems to soften the light a little too much. Add a little bit more of that bright blue. Collage materials just sliding all over the place here. Then I'm getting that big brush. Clean, fresh water, and just moving that around. You'll notice with watercolor pencils, notice this with the Derwent specifically, it's like a little soapy almost, like it makes a little bit of foam as you work it. So I'm just moving these colors around on the page, mixing them. I find the bright blue is a little more weakly pigmented than the other blue. So yeah, here I am. I'm gonna hit it with the heat gun. This is the Martha Stewart heat gun. I think I found it on clearance or on sale. I never would have bought the Martha Stewart tool unless it was on clearance or some sort of deep discount. Alright, I'm using a Bic whiteout pen here to make white circles on the page. Really like whiteout. So it sits on the surface of the paper pretty well. Doesn't sink down in the way a paint marker would. And it has a nice matte finish. So the great thing about the liquid paper is that you can get some pretty good control over it in this kind of paint marker setup. And you can also draw on top of it with pencils, pens, and it looks great. It will also resist watercolors a little bit, but when I want a kind of matte finish, I reach for the Bic paint marker. They're also a paint marker, whiteout, the whiteout pens. The great thing about the whiteout pen is that it's relatively inexpensive compared to buying a single paint marker pen. So you get a 2-pack of these at Staples for around $6 or $7, whereas you get a single white oil-based paint pen for around the price of the two. And they last quite a while. So I do like them. They'll write on just about anything. This one is running a little dry now, right? But you give it a squeeze and store it point down, and it does pretty well. So I'm a big fan of these. I draw on water bottles with them. I draw all over the place with these things. They're just, I don't know, they're great. They write on just about. They do stink. I don't know what kind of chemicals inside of them. There is quite a strong odor. But as you'll see here, compared to a paint marker, the whiteout pens sit on the surface of watercolors really well. So one of the things that I noticed with paint markers, particularly the water-based paint markers, which we all know and love, the Poscas, Malto, all of those, they have a tendency to lift watercolor paints up into them. So your white will end up tinted just a little bit with whatever color is underneath. You got to do a couple of coats to get a decent white mark. Not so much with the Bic whiteout pens. You get a nice solid white mark every single time. So worth the investment of getting a couple of these just to keep in your stash. I do notice, however, if you don't use them relatively quickly, they do go bad. I've had to throw a few out because I opened them up, shook them, and big clumps of whiteout in there. Not great. All right, so here I start out another sheet of paper, but I decide that I don't want to show the doodling on it. I went on it with some of my glossy paint markers. Just another tool that you can use. So, yeah, thanks everyone for watching. I hope you get some ideas from this. You're inspired to make some of your own collage materials. And don't get hung up on having to have the latest and greatest thing. Because if you got, some paper, some scrap paper, or paper you pulled out of your sketchbook, you can go at it with whatever material you have on hand and make some really fantastic collage materials that are 100% you and look great in your art journal. So I'll show myself using these coming up in another video here. So again, thank you for watching. Thanks for all the support. Merry Christmas to everyone, or Happy Holiday, whatever you celebrate. I hope you had a good one. All right. Thanks. Bye.